Well, to get started, I'm Michael. I'm founder of Worldwide Studios with Dylan. Our main goal is to help people build with the latest in AI, not just for agents and assistants, which is very hypey right now, but also in solving big problems across hardware and healthcare. We actually just wrapped up a program with Google in Kenya, which you can share more about if you're curious. But for today, we're here talking about Gumloop and AI automation, and specifically around smarter CRMs. Where this idea came from. I actually worked with a client recently that runs a global innovation program. They had over 1,500 people go through their events in the last year, and they had no idea who these people were. So sometimes it'd be like a first name and a last name with like notes from their team member. Sometimes it'd be an export from an event RSVP. So in 3 weeks, we built them a production level gum loop that could take the impartial data, find a source of truth like a LinkedIn, an X, or a web search, enrich their database based off of what they wanted to. And there's even, once you have that data, certain things you can build on top of that, which we can talk about. So just in terms of like the mental model, I think every single organization or individual has some level of like partial data. That could be in your Notion, that could be in HubSpot, Salesforce, Google. It almost doesn't really matter where it is. Tools like Gumloop integrate with all of them. So wherever your source of truth is, you can build and kind of have Gumloop meet you where you're at. And if you don't have a source of truth, it's a good forcing function, because once you have that, you can then start building automations that get more information and more data. When starting to look at what you do with that partial data, main mental model is trying to figure out what is one source of truth where you can learn the information you need to about that person. Someone mentioned that they were looking at like streaming data. Maybe you're looking at like where this person goes online. Could be on Twitch, could be on YouTube, could be on like TikTok live data. So you might be scraping some information. For this particular demo, we're using LinkedIn because LinkedIn is a professional source of truth. LinkedIn has done a lot of work in the last 2 years to get all AI bots off of the platform. So it's a great professional source of truth for what someone's background is and what their general experience is. But again, in terms of what's possible in Gumloop, you can also build custom web research nodes. You can connect different APIs if there's certain databases that you already have licensed to or want to work with. And you can also scrape specific websites. Like was working with someone on a conference reader, and they just scraped all the attendees from that conference page, and they used that as a source of truth for that event. So whole goal is to find some kind of source of truth that fits the general criteria, what you're thinking about for the information and data you're looking for. And then once you have the data, where this becomes really interesting is it starts to connect back to your CRM. You can filter the data, process it, and then add it to that CRM automatically. And the main way I think about this, each one is a different column, which I'll show you in the demo. You can format the data in different ways depending on what you need. And I think the most interesting thing too is you can start adding a level of reasoning so that you don't just have to trust your AI assistants or agents, you can actually see what that looks like. And then lastly, once you have the data, you can do things like filter for specific outbound, which I'll show you. You can search the database. Once your data is enriched, it's a lot easier to ask like really specific questions, and ultimately to help you make decisions on who to reach out to and why. So this is just kind of like the fundamental process. Has been thinking about like what a smarter CRM looks like, and let's get into a demo. So we've got this is just a Notion page with nothing but a first name and had emails. I deleted that right before this, but first name, and our goal is to find LinkedIn profiles, reason about like why this LinkedIn profile was selected, job title, would they fit the criteria, and what that looks like. So Gumloop itself, for people who haven't used Gumloop, it's a visual no-code automation builder. So where Gumloop is a little bit different than some other tools is, as an automation builder, the way to think about what workflows to build an automation for versus like an agent for is if you know what the expected output is, and you can write down or imagine each step just like a recipe. So an automation like using Gumloop becomes really good, almost like you're working with like a line cook who can follow the instructions every time, versus an agent platform is when you're looking for something more in an unstructured space. You don't totally know what the result is. It's a little bit fuzzy, and that's more of like a head chef mentality where you're trying to actually figure out the recipe as you go. So for Gumloop, this is a workflow. So for the workflow itself, the first thing we're doing is we're pulling from the Notion itself. And the nice thing about Gumloop is they take care of all of the integration engineering. So it's as simple as just drag and dropping nodes onto the canvas. So on the left side, I'm just pulling up the canvas, the node adder. You can read pages in Gumloop. You can read databases. So just going to pull in that node just so you can see how easy it was to pull this up. And then from that, Notion has really good permission sharing. You can pick specific databases. So this is in the Smart CRM database I just made for it to be integrated with. You can add more, you can add less, you can revoke permission. So that's really nice there. So we've got this triggered. Let's get this running. Sometimes it takes about a minute to run. We'll save this, we'll hit run. And so now that we're reading from Notion, in terms of what's happening here is we use the AI web research tool. So in gumloop, this is actually a custom tool that says, hey, you're gonna get some kind of partial information. So maybe you have the person's name, maybe you have their background, maybe you have their location. We're gonna grab this person's information and try to find their LinkedIn. So the only goal for this node is, can you find a LinkedIn post? And because it's a visual automation builder, it has really nice observability where you can look at every single node as it's happening. So we can see that this, the run is already done. We'll check out the web research node. And as we're checking out the names, it's found different LinkedIn profiles for both names, both of us in here. And it also has the reasoning. So we can say here, this looks like it's the profile here. And again, there might be some more Dylan Hollands in the world. And so sometimes names aren't enough for a unique identifier, and having the reasoning helps show what that looks like. Once we have the LinkedIn profile, now we're starting to scrape the LinkedIn profile. So if we're using LinkedIn as a source of truth, we're trying to figure out, well, what information is on LinkedIn that's helpful? And so as these nodes are drag and drop, the input of one node becomes the output of the next node. So the input for this one was the name, the output is the LinkedIn list. So as we drag and drop and connect these, we can see all the outputs here. So the output here was LinkedIn URL. So we're just dragging that into LinkedIn, and now we want to grab job title and the bio page, which you could pull as much data as you wanted from this particular source of truth. Same thing when you're scraping pages, it's really customizable. So now that we have job title and the about, now we're on that second step of trying to figure out and evaluate, like, based off this criteria, like, who is this person and are they helpful? So for us, we've been doing 2-week sprints and helping people build with the latest in AI. So this is an Ask AI node. So it's just sending an LLM call directly to any model you want. I'm using 2.5 Flash for speed right now. So the prompt is based off of this criteria. They seem generally interested in AI and they have at least 2 years experience. Please decide if they're a potential fit to build. And we're pulling in the LinkedIn data here. So it's making a decision as we go. And then the reply, it's like, just reply yes or no. I want binary. I don't need to rate it. I don't need to scale, evaluate it. You could. And tell us why. Give us the bullet points of why you think that's the case. Then based off of that, just to export the data that we want to add to the CRM, we're taking that response and we're just grabbing the yes or the no, and we're just extracting the bullet points. So sometimes for LLMs, they'll add extra text like, hey, it's so good to see this profile. I wonder who this person is, or extra text. We don't need that. We just want to extract the data. And all of these in this workflow, as it goes step by step, just comes back to the Notion page. So in terms of updating Notion in itself, just like we added a Notion reader, we have a Notion updater. And so for each one of these, we can pick based off of this workflow, what are some pieces of data we want to add in? So by scraping the LinkedIn profile, we can put that under job title. By fitting the criteria, getting that yes or no decision, we're putting that specific decision, would they fit the criteria? We've got the reasoning baked in, the LinkedIn URL if we want to manually check, and then also the criteria. And so this is automatically for each row, grabbing that information, batching it, and then updating the Notion. So where these no-code automation tools become powerful is you don't have to go between all the different sources, copy and paste between things. You can have multiple inputs and outputs and different processing along the way. So that's how it works. Let's see. So here in Notion, it's updated it. So we've got the Notion link. Let's see if it actually got the right Notion link, or sorry, got the LinkedIn link. Let's see if that works. Cool, that's me. So my name was enough as a unique identifier, grabbed it. And then again, we have that reasoning explained here. So if we wanted to evaluate it, we could see why it thought that this person was the fit. It pulled the job title from LinkedIn, and then we have the evaluation criteria here. Yes, like they fit this particular criteria. And this, I think, is when you start using automations to enrich data, usually at the human level, you're still working within your HubSpot, your Salesforce, or your Notion. So I find it's helpful to have an observability layer where don't just take the AI's like yes or no, because you might have to update the prompt sometimes if it's not working. You might have to figure out like if do you agree with the general decision? And so one of the best ways to do that is to be able to see like why did you decide yes or no for this particular one? So if I wanted to check someone before, let's say, adding them to an email campaign or before doing outreach for them or whatever may be the next steps from this, we now have the reasoning criteria. So that's an intro to gumloop. That's an intro to enriching different data columns. And again, as you can imagine, this is just showing one example for each one of these. You could do like, can you find them on X? Can you find their YouTube profile? Once you find their YouTube profile, can you scrape their latest podcast? Once you have their latest podcast, can you make sense of that? And then in terms of criteria too, you can imagine for the global program I was working with, they were doing mentoring for startups. So first they wanted to grab all of the different skills from different people so they could understand what role that person could play as a mentor for their startups. And then the second one was they wanted to figure out based off their experience, what kind of industries they would be a match for. So in terms of those two data enrichments and observability, once they had that, they could actually start talking with their CRM to say, hey, based off of this new space tech startup that's doing zero gravity experiments, who's someone who might be able to help them with like regulatory or compliance. And so the more data that you have within your CRM, depending on the main outcome or output you're looking for, there's also other things you can do with the data, like filter it, search it, and do different things. So I'll pause there. That's the demo into Gumloop. That's showing how it updates automatically into wherever your source of truth is, Notion, or wherever it may be. And then also specific nodes that put this together in 15 minutes. And I think when building Gumloop, there's a little bit of a learning curve, but there's a lot of ways you can learn with Gumloop, and I can show that if people are curious and learn as you go. And then also usually it usually takes 1 or 2 iterations to start running this at scale. And so you'll get some different errors where right out of the box, you might be able to get like 1 or like 10 batches. For the one that we just shipped for a client, they ran it 1,600 times. So that took 3 iterations. It was about like 2 hours total, just in terms of catching a couple different bugs. So we could actually do it we could run that Gumloop 1,000 plus times. So when working with Gumloop, because it's an automation platform, you'll get 1 or 2 errors that you'll just have to fix along the way and make it more robust, which I can share more too. So it's an intro to Gumloop. It's an intro to how to make your CRM smarter. Curious if you all have any questions, and happy to extend the questions beyond this particular use case. Just wanted to show this one use case to get the conversation going.
And so you mentioned there may be more than one Dylan. I think I'm a great person to test because there's another Dylan Holland here in Seattle who also works in tech. So like he went to the same gym as me. So it's like if you look me up, you're probably gonna find that guy. Is that something that you can handle in there, or does it just pick one and you have to deal with?
That's a great question. This system assumes whatever information we're feeding it from the initial CRM will find that person. So with the test of 1,000 plus data points, what we found was that name plus location was generally enough. And
Yeah.
for, I would say, in terms of effectiveness, it got about 97% out of that 1,000. So for the last 30, half of them just weren't even online, which like you might not even be able to find. And then for the other ones where it's like, hey, it's conflicted, I don't know. If you know you're working with kind of more generalized data where there might be multiples, you might actually like output it to say, hey, outline the top 3 profiles for this name and then evaluate it based off of that. So for the one test we were doing, name plus location was generally enough. But if you don't have more information and you're just working with name and it is really trying to one-shot it, you could try like getting multiple profiles and then evaluating it, or either having human in the loop or putting an AI eval there. Or you could also start pulling different APIs so you're not doing a general web search. I think this kind of like this to me kind of shows the power of like what an automation tool can do. We are like literally searching the web to try to find the Dylan Holland in Seattle. And so that's a little bit of a wild kind of task. There's other smarter ways too if you want. If there was like specific clients in real estate and you had access to a real estate API, that's more direct too. So your source of truth might be different based off of that. And so let's actually see for this run for Dylan. Let's see what the output was. Well,
Yeah.
it one-shotted you. So
Yeah.
for this one, it worked. But again, in terms of accuracy, if that was something you're looking for, you could actually design that in the Gumloop workflow.
Sure.
Awesome. Any other questions? I know, Melissa, you were thinking about different AI agents or assistants based off of this. Any questions that you have based off what you're working on?
Uh, hmm. Um, we have our own database of recommendations that are already tagged across like 26 categories. And would we be able to sort of dump our database into this?
Yeah. How is the database held? What are you using to store it?
A couple things, but like, Google Docs,
Yep.
uh, or what do Google Sheets. Sorry. Yeah.
Yeah. So, in terms of integrations for gumloop, there's about 100 integrations, and they're constantly adding more. And you can also program custom ones. So the whole Google suite is actually added. So anything you do with the Google API, you can do in gumloop. So just like we had Notion up here as the reader,
hmm
you could do a Google Sheet reader. You can do a
hmm
Google Sheet updater, which would update the cell, or you could also write to a new row. So you can use Google Sheets. And I think one interesting thing here is it just showed like a linear process where it was like Notion to Notion. You can
hmm
also start doing, I know every organization is like a lot messier and kind of chaotic, more chaotic than this. So you could
hmm
also do as like an output or an input is you could have multiple updates depending on where your source of truth is. So if your go-to-market team is like the main, I'm just pulling up some different notes here. If your go-to-market team is like the main holder of the HubSpot, you can export
hmm
some of the research and runs into HubSpot. If your like marketing team is only allowed Google Sheets and that's just they iterate quickly, so they need this data daily or hourly, you can have it updated there. So the benefit of something like this too is you can have multiple outputs or inputs just to keep a more synchronized database, depending on whatever your goal is.
Okay, great.
Yeah.
And then could you sync your Google Sheet integration with your CRM?
Yep. Yep. And
Okay, cool.
so same thing is if you're using Google Sheet as like the initial research pad, you could then use the Google Sheet as a source of truth to then update the CRM too. So these could be above or below each other. And you also, for each one of these, we'll do the Google Sheet one. So I manually pressed run for this one in the upper right. You can also have different triggers. So for Google Sheets, for example, every single time a Google Sheet is updated, you could use that to trigger this workflow that says when we add something to Google Sheets, make sure that gets added to our CRM, our HubSpot, or this other place. So Gumloop makes it really easy to start really automating that first step.
Great. Great.
Yeah, any other questions? Questions around Gumloop, questions around whatever project or whatever you're looking to build?
Could you, in terms of the CRM scraping, we wouldn't be looking at LinkedIn. We would be looking at, well, possibly LinkedIn, but people on Reddit, people on TikTok, people active in, streaming entertainment conversations. So like, how would we scrape them and, CRM wise, just getting, I guess, just connecting keywords with handles kind of thing.
Yeah, great,
Reddit
great,
scraper. There we
great
are,
question.
Reddit
So
scraper.
in terms of platforms, some platforms are very friendly in terms of scraping. So for Reddit, you can actually scrape subreddits, queries, posts specifically, and you can see if you can get the information you're looking for. So there are some things with Reddit. They also just made a new like create your own node with AI. So if there was something that this did not do, but the general Reddit API allows you to do. My account isn't linked here, so I won't do this, but happy to follow up if you have specific questions. You could also design a custom node to whatever Reddit allows you to scrape, you could do that. So one path is integrations that are already there. And then if there are certain things that integrations that aren't there, they also have a bunch of pre-built web scrapers, web crawlers. And so if you have the link, but there's might not be an API and you're looking to grab like all of their posts in a specific place, you could try a scraper. The caveat here is some social media sites don't allow for this, so you might get blocked. But if there is a website that you can access and a bot can scrape it or crawl it, you have access to do that. And then lastly, too, in terms of if you're just looking for like general source of truth online, like for this person, do they even have a Reddit? Do they even have a link, a Twitch presence? Do they even have other media presence? You can use something like Perplexity, which is just like an enhanced Google search with LLMs. get like raw output of all the places they might be, and then use that for your next step in the workflow. So Gumloop has a lot of different ways to search the web, find different information, and this is going to be just website and platform specific. So if you're trying to do specific things like TikTok, there might be there's like a way to be able to do that that you'd have to explore.
And I may have a little more insight there. So it's not necessarily a gum loop problem, but when you get into things like Reddit or TikTok or even Instagram, there it's not easy. So like I worked at a place and like our core moat was that we had a pretty complex software that let us identify people on a place like TikTok or Instagram. And even then it was like 18 to 20% success rate was like great. You know, people were willing to pay a bunch of money because it is hard, especially TikTok. Reddit may be easier, but especially on TikTok, it's all video, so there's not even a lot of text for you to try to identify. And then like a lot of people don't use their real name, they use a nickname, or they don't care, they
Right.
don't have a location or anything. So it gets really, really hard to find someone on TikTok.
Yeah, I think that one of my main learnings from this project too is finding someone and verifying that that's the person you're looking for is actually a non-trivial problem in terms of
Yeah.
verification, and based off of the information you have and the information you're looking for, you do have to figure out what that looks like.
Yeah. So finding them on like Facebook or LinkedIn is a lot easier. And then from there, you can like use that information. You can use those pictures to then match them against people on but like, so the more you find them on more places, the easier it is to find them on other places. But it is a hard problem and it's like a compounding solution.
Yeah, I would say in terms of general access to this is relevant beyond even just specific platforms. Is if there's an API that exists, you can create a custom node in Gumloop for that API. So I was just looking at like the TikTok developer API. Like if you have information, you should be able to pull up like their avatar URL, which could be their profile photo or it could be synonymous, their display name, their bios. You can pull information from different videos. So rather than trying to like raw scrape it, if there's a way to be able to use the TikTok API, that increases the robustness because you're not just kind of wildly trying to web search for it. And this is true for any API or anything you want to plug into an automation.
Okay, great. I wonder if we could even use it as our recommendation engine um, on the consumer facing side. Is that possible?
Yeah, so that's based off of the global program I was mentioning, they went from wanting to do just like a hey, does this person fit the startup mentor to like, can we just search our whole database in natural language? And
Yeah.
with Gumloop, there's a couple different ways you could build that recommendation engine. There's some nodes that do local query search if you've got an embedding space or the database is specific enough to be able to do like a local search. You also, for them, they were doing just large language models have a million token context, which is about 5,000 pages. So for them, we
Right.
actually just did a two-step process for recommendation, which is use the lightest model to filter the top 100 potential. So it was Google Flash. They had specific criteria that you could add in modular ways for whatever people were looking for. Use Google Flash to highlight the top 100, and then use a reasoning model like Claude's latest 4 with extended thinking or OpenAI's o3, which just got cheaper yesterday. Use a reasoning model to make like the final decision of like, okay, for the top 5 people, the top 5
Right.
recommendations, like here's what I recommend. So you
Right.
could build a recommendation engine using LLMs or other nodes for, yeah, which could then be external facing. Someone could submit a form or submit something on your interface, and you could print that back and send it to them.
Print that back. What does that mean? Print that back. Print that
Uh, for
back.
for this group specifically, it was a Google Doc. So for them, they're just like every time we have one query, we want a Google Doc. So the output
Yeah.
of that text was printed in a Google Doc.
Okay.
Um,
We have a lot of our own content with our own voices kind of thing.
yep.
And we're trying to show, because they're experts, like who they are, credential kind of things, so that when the recommendations, taking them through the recommendations through various criteria, the final recommendations that we give, we want to show who's giving it and their content. And it's our own closed
Yep.
small language model, you could say. So would that still work, I wonder, with not a whole lot to pull from
Yeah.
externally?
Yeah, I think some of these models have gotten really good with different things you can add to the system prompt or even the context window. So for like custom voices, instead of doing a one-shot output where it's like, hey, give me this recommendation based off of the criteria you have, you can say, hey, here's this person's last three recommendations based off of their style of writing, based off of like the way they think. You could actually bake that into some of the thought processes into the selection process itself. If you were going for personalized recommendations based off of author, you also could use past data as a few shot example for the writing style or the output you're looking for. So it's a very like light way to do fine tuning. Or if you have a small language model that you know works best, you could feed all of this information into that to then get the outputs you're looking for.
Yeah. We definitely don't want to get sued by our experts for using their voice and all that. We're following all the lawsuits happening and being very careful.
Yeah.
Um, so that's something we want to be wary of. They just announced a new lawsuit today. I just saw Reddit is suing for people for scraping.
Yeah, I saw that too. I think for Reddit, Google was one of the first to license from Reddit, so they
Yeah.
had some transaction there. And for Anthropic, yeah, it looks like you just saw that they were suing them for scraping Reddit too.
Oh, wait, who's Reddit suing?
Anthropic,
Oh, because their deal is with, well,
the
but
deals with Google.
they've made this API, so does that mean any of us could get sued for using the Reddit API?
Let's see. So Reddit just filed a lawsuit against Anthropic for scraping without permission and paying for it. So I think the main difference here, there's a question of like, what are you using it for? And I think for these large foundation models, they pretty much are like steamrollers of the internet. They're pulling as much information as possible, and they're using that for training data, which that
Yeah.
goes against Reddit's term of service. So I would say you can read more around like what's allowed, what's not allowed. Generally, they have
Right.
an API to access their platform, so there are things that should be usable. Something like training a foundation model is not, for example.
Right.
Yeah, and that's a lawsuit. There definitely has not been a victory
Yep, I
there
would say
yet.
there's no
I
final
would not bet
verdict.
on. Yeah, I would not bet on a victory for Reddit there.
Okay. What are your what's your mo pricing model?
Our pricing model for how we work with people to build stuff.
Yeah.
Yeah, we do. We focus on 2 week sprints to help people build their own tools, their own automations and assistants in Gumloop or try and code. That's $500 for 2 weeks. You can think of that like working with a one-on-one personal trainer in a gym. So
Right.
that's one side to it. And if you're looking to actually like contract the workout, we both do different contract work. So if you're like, hey, we have these 3 automations we want to build. Here's how it exists in our database, and here's how we want it to exist in Google Sheets. We can definitely follow up afterwards there. Those contracts just end up looking custom based off of what people want built.
Okay. All right. That's so $500 for 2 weeks where you coach people through it kind of thing.
Exactly. And that's our main goal is it's never been easier to build. So you can think of Gumloop like virtual Lego blocks. We've helped investors, founders, operators build their own tools. And so the way that we set this up is in 2 weeks, don't just like watch lectures and YouTube videos. In 2 weeks, get to a prototype that you can show your team, that you can start batching in production. And so in terms of
Right.
how we set that up, intro to help you scope and really figure out what that looks like, 2 build sessions with office hours and feedback async, and then a demo at the end where you actually have to show what you built and how it works and get extra feedback at that point. So it becomes both a forcing function, the accountability, and the coaching to make sure that you can make as much progress as possible in 2 weeks.
Cool. And then do you pay a subscription to continue to use it?
For anything you build is yours. So for example, if you built a Gumloop, Gumloop works on a credit-based system, like a lot of these tools right now. It depends on your like total throughput and what nodes you're using, but for most people, these 2 tiers are more than enough. For the global innovation company I was talking about, they paid for Pro for 1 month because they did the 1,000 batch, and that used all the credits, and now they're on the $97 a month one. So in terms of like what you build is yours, and if you're doing like a one specific workflow that you're running as much as possible, you might be able to pay for a bit and then lower or increase your usage. So everything you build is, yeah, depending on what platform it looks like. And if cost optimization is a question, that's something we could also cover in the sprint.
Okay. And then I was just looking at that in the subscription model, and it said like 75,000. Is it based on audience use, like the 75,000, 30,000
Yeah, so these
credits?
are credits. So for how Gumloop works in terms of credits is each node has a cost to run that node. And the thing that makes Gumloop different from like other automation platforms like a Zapier or Make, every time you use a Zap, you pay a credit because they have a if this then that logic that predates LLMs. For Gumloop, they don't want you to pay unless you're using an AI because it costs money to call a large language model or some kind of
Right.
layer of intelligence. So you can see here, reading Notion costs 0 credits. So even if you're running like 1,000 or 10,000 person database, it will always cost 0 credits to run through Notion. Then for the first AI node, we have 40 credits. Then for the first scraping node, we have 25 credits per scrape. And so the way you can think about credits, it's about 3 credits per cent. So it costs about 30 cents, 20 cents. This whole workflow costs about 50 cents per data enrichment, and that had 6 different fields. So you can also run initial tests of like 5 to 10 to kind of see what the price range will be, and then expand up or scope down depending on budgets or usage rates.
Okay. All right.
Great. Do you have any other questions?
Okay. uh, is is um is this your startup or is it
So
you
Worldwide
created this?
Studios, the coaching, that's
Oops,
Dylan
I
and I run
lost you.
that. We've
I
we've
don't know
helped
what
over a
happened
dozen people build so far. Gumloop, we aren't part of the Gumloop
because
team.
I lost volume.
Oh, let me know if you can hear me okay.